Hello, it's your professor, Travis Wolven again. So I am here and I am excited. I'm going to be talking about chapter 6 today. And yeah, just really, really pumped. Um, this topic could be looked at as kind of a basic topic, but I would argue that not only could it be considered basic, but basic is another way to say foundational. So, although there are some really easy to grasp elements about it, I would also argue that it is a topic, it is a chapter that is important to think about. I don't think that it's intellectually challenging to consider at all. However, I do think that much of the things that are discussed in this chapter are things that I myself and other professional storytellers, performers, and public speakers, and teachers, and just business professionals that I know utilize regularly. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to go ahead and share screen here. So, and again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to do my best to keep this a short, tight video. Thank you so much. Alrighty. So, once I get this going, there we go. All right, so we're on chapter 6, finding a purpose and selecting a topic. All right. And this is divided into four sections. We have section one, which is topic selection. Section two, how to narrow a topic. Three, what to do when you inevitably draw a blank, specifically in choosing a topic. And we'll get into that in a second. And then finally, thinking about specific purposes. Okay, so here's the thing. In topic selection, with what the textbook talks about and just concepts that I've seen in my regular performance schedule, um, first, just think about some basic things. What is the purpose to which you are called to speak? Whether you are internally called because you're interested, or because you are requested by your professor, or maybe by your career, job, etc. Right? Is it to inform, to give information, facts, figures, concepts about an idea? Is it to persuade, to try to get people to act or think or do something in a particular way? Or finally, classic reason for storytelling, to entertain, right? Is it something that is there for enjoyment, right? Is it something where you're giving a toast for an event, or maybe it's an anecdote to lighten the mood on a serious topic or situation that you may also be presenting on? So this is really, really important. And I do see storytellers regularly discuss this in terms of what type of story they want to tell, in terms of what type of introduction they want to give for another storyteller, etc. And so, yeah, it's really important to think through this one. Okay, second, really huge on topic selection, the audience, right? And ask the four W's or the five, six W's about it, right? Who, what, where, when, why, and how, right? Who are they? What do they want? Where are they located? Where are you meeting them? Where will you be speaking to them, right? When? What time of day? Is it early in the morning when they're going to be tired? As a teacher, I know that this is a really huge thing. Whenever I'm working with my student experiences are vastly different based on the time of day. At 7:30 in the morning, they're super tired. Earlier in the afternoon, after they've eaten lunch, they're kind of having that tired moment because their body's processing food. And why? Why do they want you there? These are important things to think about. Next, we have context. And I would argue that context is everything, right? We have social contexts, we have societal contexts, relational contexts, right? Cultural. For a simple example, of somebody myself who's from the North and the South, right? Um, it's normal for me to really think about whether I'm going to say words like y'all or ain't, because my accent is not necessarily Southern, right? When I'm speaking to audiences in the South, whether it's at Jonesboro, or in Georgia, or somewhere else around the region, um, it is part of my authentic self, but also part of my goal to connect with audiences in the South by saying y'all in the beginning. Hey, y'all, how y'all doing? Right? even though I don't necessarily have a Southern accent, that simple term can sometimes bring us together, right? Whereas if I'm speaking in New Jersey or New York or Boston or any of those areas, saying y'all could be sometimes off-putting, and may separate me from my audiences. And then, of course, if I'm abroad with international audiences, um, they may not even be familiar with that term at all. So just one really, really simple example of how that might be the case. And then the last thing on there is your time frame, right? Timing is very important. Even at the International Storytelling Center, it's really normal for people to be looking at the clock. There's literally a clock on the stage. So you can see it as you're speaking, so you can know and be aware of whether you're keeping within the time frame or you're falling outside of it. Um, some groups are very relaxed and lenient about time frames, and some groups very much are not. And so this is something for you as a speaker to really think about. Even if the person who's inviting you to an event to speak doesn't mention a time frame, please, 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 please always ask, what is your time frame for speaking or presenting, right? And be open and flexible. This is very important. And let's go ahead and go back to those slides. Okay. So next, narrowing topics. Okay. A big part of this is thinking about the purpose. What are the motivations of the audience? What's your motivation, right? Why are you there? Is it just simply a class assignment, right? Or is it something where something happened in your life and you really need to be speaking at a particular public event about something, right? And then as well, you know, I would argue, is it context appropriate, right? Let's say you're at some sort of local meeting where you're meeting with City Hall to talk about small businesses or different communities in the area. It is important to talk about the overall U.S. economy, but do we need to spend 5 minutes discussing the U.S. economy, or could it just be said in one or two sentences about where we are at with the state of affairs with the U.S. economy, good or ill, right? And then, once we moved on from there, okay, now maybe it's important to talk about the East Tennessee economy or the welfare of the businesses in the region, right? But again, do we need to talk about that for so very long? Or maybe just make the point of the context and then move on to specifically, let's say you were in Johnson City, Tennessee, where ETSU is located and I currently live, then you would want to spend more of the time specifically focusing on Johnson City and the small businesses in the area, right? Or as well, if you're talking to your students, let's say you're a teacher and you're talking to your students about literature, right? Do we just talk about the entire body of literature? Maybe it's important to make some existential statements about it, but moreover, it might be more important to just hone in on, okay, we're looking at early 19th century Victorian literature. Great, right? So whatever the case may be, think about the specific needs of your audience and why they may or may not care. Okay, drawing a blank. So the textbook really focuses more so on drawing a blank with your topic, right? And I would argue that if you don't take away anything else from this whole talk, I would take away what we talked about earlier, specifically with time and thinking about your audience. And the third thing I'd want people to take away is having a personal inventory, right? So, what are the stories that you tell, right? What are skills and topics that you've learned in your life? So, for me, I have a background as an English as a second language teacher, right? So I can always talk about language acquisition, learning new languages, and how that works with the brain and the body and social needs, right? As well, I have a background as a literature major and government major. So those are always things in my repertoire to talk about different elements of literature or different elements of international relations. And then finally, I live in this region and I have my own life, right? So I can draw upon those sources. Oftentimes in personal inventory, we can think about the story of our name, right? Or the story of how our parents or grandparents met, or the story of how we got to where we are, right? Those are some easy things to find in your personal inventory, right? What are stories that you tell at holidays that are fun or funny that maybe other audiences may not know about? What are stories of transformation, right? And I would argue that people should seriously, make a Word or Google document for yourself to have as a list of running stories, professional, personal, and otherwise, right? Public psyche. If you're not sure of what kind of topics, look in the media, right? Look at top hits of songs and movies. Look at bestseller books, right? What are things that people are consuming right now and thinking about? Harry Potter, of course, is going to be a universally famous book, but is it really in the public psyche right now? What are other works that might be similar, right? Whereas, these days, a lot of the bestseller books and things that are being discussed are kind of romantic and romantic comedy novels, right? That's a big part that's really popular right now. So maybe thinking about that. Top hits in music, right? I'll always love the Beatles, but is that really in the public psyche right now, right? Who are the top performers right now? Taylor Swift, over the past decade, a huge name, and there are so many, 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 many more, right? And then as well, personal connections. What personal connections do you have to your audience or the event or the moment that you're speaking in, right? So for me, if I'm speaking to audiences in this area, I can always talk about the fact that I lived here once 10 years ago and I moved back because I loved it so much. I just loved Johnson City so much that I came back. And that's always a thing I can open with or close with to connect with audiences in this region, right? So if you're ever drawing a blank in terms of topics, start to think about those three areas, and your textbook talks about the first two. Okay. Finally, specific purposes. So you'll notice you'll notice some things that are already in the first three um, sections of the chapter. Again, you have your audience. Always, always, always think about your audience because you're speaking to connect with an audience. So it's an audience connection. That's a big thing. So maybe asking people who may be in the audience, ask people who know about the audience what their interests, motivations, and purposes are for your time speaking. Context. Bum, bum, bum. Again, I could talk about context all day long. Uh, always have an open mind because context may change. Something strange or surprising may happen before or during your speaking, and I think it's very important to give space and time for that, right? I've had moments where I was telling a story and then somebody in the audience seemed like they were having a physical struggle. I stopped the story because it's more important that they that they live and they survive. And they were able to get help. They had to step out of the event, but that's something to think about, right? So think about your context before and during, right? Third, and I would say maybe the most important part of this and a big, big takeaway from the whole chapter, state your purpose. Always state your purpose as to what you're specifically trying to do with the speech. Hugely important and very, very helpful. So, right from the get-go, if you state your name and if you literally quite overtly state, "Hi, my name is Travis Wolven, and today I'm coming to speak to you about A, B, and C," whatever it might be. Right. Keep notes. Keep notes for yourself. Go to get help. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share there. I always have this little, cute notebook with me with a little raven on it, or a notebook that's similar. It looks professional. I get good comments on it. And then, I can have them with me to review before I speak. And then if it's a type of speaking engagement that's more lengthy or something where I might have a podium, it's okay for me to put my notes on there, right? And, having those notes, it makes a big difference. So keep notes for yourself, keep notes of things that you are interested in or talk about, and keep notes on your personal inventory of stories that you can tell.